Good evening. We begin tonight by recognizing what a difficult week this has been for so many people and how tough the days ahead will be as more funerals are held in El Paso and Dayton. More moments for a parent or a child or a childhood friend to face the infinite sadness of feeling the word is, when it comes to a loved one, give way to was. My grandpa was. My child was. So many people are facing that now. So many who've lived those moments already at Sandy Hook and Parkland and Orlando and Pittsburgh are reliving them yet again. Because in many respects, there's sadly nothing new here, whether it's the weapons used, the first responders, the heroes, the heartache. Nothing new in the call for change or what feels like the endless, fruitless battle between the forces of gun control and gun rights. In some ways, though, we've really never seen anything like this. We've never seen a president offer division to the hurting instead of unity, or use a visit meant to console to settle scores and air grievances, some of them entirely made up, or be the focus of questions about whether his racist statements gave an already hate-filled person another reason to kill. And today, the alleged El Paso gunman made it clear, admitting he was the killer and that he specifically targeted Mexicans. Nor have we seen, as is being reported tonight in Axios, a president whose campaign officials say that having the president of the United States called a racist could be politically good for him. That's where we are. That's how this week is ending. It's also ending with the president making a claim that he's made before about action on gun restrictions.
I think we can get something really good done. I think we can have some really meaningful background checks. We don't want people that are mentally ill, people that are sick. We don't want them having guns. Who does? Well, we'll see where the NRA will be. But we have to have meaningful background checks.
Now, keeping them honest, we've already seen where the NRA says it will be against them. They've just said so, warning the president and his base would not like them and saying in a statement, quote, the NRA opposes any legislation that unfairly infringes upon the rights of law-abiding citizens. Now, remember, the president's talked tough about his willingness to challenge the NRA before. He did it after the Parkland shootings, including at a gathering of bipartisan lawmakers where Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy put the challenge to the president.
Mr. President, it's going to have to be you that brings the Republicans to the table on this, because right now the gun lobby would stop it in its tracks.
I like that responsibility, Chris. I really do. I think it's time. It's time that a president stepped up, and we haven't had them. And I'm talking Democrat and Republican presidents. They have not stepped up. And they do have great power. I agree with that. They have great power over you people. They have less power over me. Some of you people are petrified of the NRA. You can't be petrified. They want to do what's right, and they're going to do what's right. I really believe that.
Well, he alone could take on the NRA, was the message, except he didn't. And wherever you stand on gun regulation, that's just a fact. Talk is easy. Doing something that might upset the powerful NRA and some of his base, perhaps, that is tough. And though the president likes to talk about being tough and being powerful, he sure seems to shrink in size when the NRA starts whispering in his ear. So yeah, the president has talked about tougher, stronger, meaningful background checks before. He's singing that song again, only this time, as it was during his trip to El Paso and Dayton, he's largely singing it in the key of me.
They supported me very early, and that's been a great decision they made. The NRA's made a great decision in supporting me, and nobody else would have won. As you know, they supported me very early, far earlier than anybody thought possible.
So the NRA loves him, he says, but this isn't about the NRA, he claims.
This isn't a question of NRA, Republican, or Democrat. I will tell you, I spoke to Mitch McConnell yesterday. He's totally on board. He said, I've been waiting for your call. He is totally on board.
And keeping him honest, he's not on board, not even a little. The Senate Majority Leader has merely said he'll take up the issue, and only after the summer recess, perhaps because that's when maybe anger over the killings in Dayton and El Paso might have calmed, and when people may not be paying such close attention. As for the president, well, he just left town for his own summer vacation, first to the Hamptons, then to his golf club in New Jersey. As for winning over Democrats, the president expressed optimism there as well, but he couldn't stop himself from digressing, as he did in this moment, from the subject at hand to an ode to himself.
And Chuck Schumer in particular loves my China policy, as you probably know. I said, I can't believe it. You actually like something that I'm doing. He said, not like, love.
So much love for the president and his policies from Schumer, from the people of Dayton and El Paso, too. Rockstar kind of love, according to some in the administration. Respect of the office, love. Flushed with all that love, the president went on to say that he's, quote, winning and winning big, unquote, with China before getting back to background checks and the nice new letter Kim Jong-un sent him. And basically, wherever you stand on gun legislation, getting any legislation through a divided Congress, that is hard enough. It takes persistence and focus, a clear determination to keep at it. Well, today, the president claimed he's got all that, but he couldn't make it through a sentence without verbally wandering off to flatter himself, which, as the week has gone, is pretty much par for the course. Some perspective now on the news and this whole week of news. CNN political analyst and New York Times White House correspondent Maggie Haberman. So the president is saying meaningful background checks. Not exactly sure what that means, but it is very reminiscent of the language he used in the wake of Parkland.
It is, and at that time, his aides said he was there on background checks, that's what he wanted to do, and then the NRA intervened. Depending on which aide you talk to, he has been there all along for background checks and just sort of got cold feet when he was talking to the NRA in the last round. Other aides suggest that he has had a push to get there, but he's been discussing it with them since Saturday. Again, to your point, we have been there before. And not only have we been there before on background checks, we've been there before on legislation where the president has insisted there is an appetite for a deal on immigration, on a number of other things, and there isn't. And so the proof is going to be in the pudding. Could this one be different? It might be, but so far the signs that would require that, such as Mitch McConnell bringing the Senate back, having the immediacy of action around what just happened in Texas and in Ohio, that hasn't happened. And so is there still going to be an appetite in a few weeks when the Senate returns? We'll see.
Right. I mean, it sounds you could just as easily make the argument Mitch McConnell is just trying to slow walk this and, push it to a time when something else has come up and people are no longer as fired up about it.
Mitch McConnell and the president spoke several times this week, I'm told by a couple of people, and they talked on this topic. And basically, McConnell's viewpoint was that he's going to do what his caucus wants, but the president's going to have to be the one who gets the votes. And so far, I understand that he's had conversations with folks like Lindsey Graham, and he's had conversations with Pat Toomey. But so far, there is not really a sense that he's doing the kind of arm twisting that, say, we saw on the tax bill in 2017. And until we see that, I don't think this is going to happen.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised and stuff, but it's normal when a powerful human being who's the president of the United States says something that you're sort of supposed to believe what they say and that it has meaning and that they might follow through. When the president, mocked the other Congress members for being scared of the NRA and said he's not and that, he'll take it on and they want to do what's right and then does nothing and then yet again now is saying it's not about the NRA. I don't know why. I mean, we are rationally sitting here saying, well, maybe this time will be different. We don't know.
We don't know. Here's the reason why the president has said to aides that this will be different in terms of the NRA. The NRA is in a substantially weakened position that has an enormous amount of internal turmoil. Right. So the president has privately said to advisors that he thinks the NRA is going to go bankrupt and they're not going to be able to come at him the way that they might otherwise in terms of financial support, that they wouldn't be there to withhold the support anyway. Remember, they were a huge outside funder of his election in 2017 in terms of being supportive. So he thinks that he's got the upper hand and he tends to look at things that way. But what other advisors have said to him is, that he's sort of misreading this, although I don't think they've necessarily put it that way, but they've said the NRA is going to remain pretty powerful through your election, and their members, many of them are your voters. So they're still going to have a voice. And when they start really, the NRA hasn't really come out pushing back aggressively yet. Mm-hmm. I'm told that is coming. If that comes, we'll see what the president is saying.
There was reporting about a phone call from Wayne LaPierre from the NRA.
It was actually it was in the other direction. It was the president called Wayne LaPierre on Tuesday, yes, and he was talking about how it's time, we're going to get this done, there's going to be a signing ceremony in the Rose Garden, and LaPierre was pretty clear with the president, I'm told, that is not something the NRA is going to support, just based on what they're describing it. Now, again, we have no idea what these details are. We don't know what we're talking about. There's no actual legislation.
Right. He's saying meaningful background checks. That could mean anything.
The statement is not meaningful because we don't know what he's talking about. In a sentence before he said that, we don't have specifics. The president also said that he had spoken with LaPierre, several times this week. As I understand it, they had, as of yesterday, only spoken on Tuesday. So there are a lot of things being said that don't check out. We will see where we are in a few weeks. This is all, unless there is a push to build support for this by the president, and maybe there will be, but unless there is, this is unlikely to move forward.
I'm smiling because that phrase you use, that could be a chyron
what did I say?
On most days. the statement is meaningless because we have no idea what he's talking about.
Well, it's
a fascinating. It's true, but
he used the word meaningful, so I was just saying.
Right. Yes, I know.
It's not
It's
meaningful.
accurate.
I think that most of the president's crises that he has dealt with in his administration and his time as president have been of his own making. This was not one. This was one. I mean, I understand that pointing to the rhetoric in the manifesto that the alleged shooter in Texas used, that people have connected to things that the president has said. But in terms of just sort of being at the president's own hand, this was not something he did. This is something he's had to deal with. And this was over the weekend when this was all developing. 31 people at the time. It was I think 29, but 31 people dead in 2 different cities. This was a huge crisis, and a lot of his advisors will privately admit this was a commander-in-chief moment that he did not meet in real time.
Right.
So
in fact, he, to your point, he ultimately made it
on Monday
a fumble of his own making. I mean, I'm wondering what you're hearing about. What are people in the White House actually saying about, the rock star tweet and the president talking about Beto O'Rourke and his crowd sizes? And
he has the president. Most of his aides will say the same thing that they have said after every single one of these moments. It's not like we are unused to hearing the president talk about himself or talk about his rally crowds. He does this in almost every setting he's in. He turns it into something about himself. It is glaring when it is something like this, which is supposed to be about the victims and the people who were suffering during these attacks. And so his aides had hoped to get him in and out with sort of minimal contact with both the people he was seeing, but also minimal opportunities to go off script. The press was not invited in to the hospital at Dayton. And to be clear, press is often not brought into those kinds of settings, as you know.
As they should not be.
Right. That was a...
But there was reporting that the president was annoyed.
He was annoyed. He wanted them brought in. His staff had been working with the hospital, and they had understandably not done that. And then he either didn't know that or didn't understand it or doesn't there's a gap between what he thinks the media is supposed to be doing, which is from his experience in reality television and in business and real estate, and what being president is and what the press around that and the responsibilities around that relate to, and he just doesn't understand it.
I actually was giving him credit when there weren't cameras, because I thought, this is how it should be. He should be privately meeting with families and first responders.
He has a thing about believing that he should get positive press for things he should get for moments like the address that he gave on Monday, where he, denounced white supremacy, or after Charlottesville.
And all supremacy.
And also, right, and every supremacy. Or after Charlottesville, when he eventually gave that speech that was more condemnatory. And then when he doesn't get the coverage he thinks he deserves, he lashes out. And this is following that cycle. So it's not a surprise, but the volume of it, I think, was the surprise. And the degree to which he was ordering aides to push out positive images about himself and what he was doing. It was just jarring.
Maggie Haberman, thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate it. Some of what we've been talking about with respect to the president's behaviors, actions in the Tony setting are having effects beyond the West Wing. Just ahead tonight, an exclusive interview with a career Foreign Service officer who just quit in a very public way with an op-ed. He says he left fed up with what he sees in the White House and being part of what he calls the complacent state that enables the president. Coming up next, the photo out of El Paso that is also stirring controversy. The president and the infant who is now an orphan. That little boy's, whose name is Paul, his parents were killed at the Walmart. The question of whether it's an appropriate photo, the president giving a thumbs up. Well, that's the father of a wounded survivor ahead. In a scathing op-ed in the Washington Post, a career Foreign Service officer explains why he's resigned in protest of President Trump. His name is Chuck Park, and he spent 10 years serving in various countries for the United States. He wrote in part, "I came into the government inspired by a president who convinced me there was still some truth to the gospel of American exceptionalism. A child of immigrants from South Korea, I also felt a duty to the society that welcomed my parents and allowed me and my siblings to thrive. Over 3 tours abroad, I worked to spread what I believe were American values, freedom, fairness, and tolerance. But more and more, I found myself in a defensive stance, struggling to explain to foreign peoples the blatant contradictions at home." He goes on to say he never saw an anti-Trump deep state in the government or a resistance. He calls what he saw a complacent state, and a state where political appointees contributed to incompetence and contradictory policies that the president would then sometimes change on a whim without any notification. Chuck Park joins me tonight for his first TV interview about his high-profile resignation. So, explain why you decided to resign.
Sure. So let me start off by saying this is absolutely a personal decision for me. It was really difficult for me. I don't mean to project my own values and the limits of my own conscience on the entirety of the federal bureaucracy.
Right.
So let me first say that there are thousands and thousands of federal employees who did not make the same decision I did. And they are absolutely working to prevent this freight train from going off the rails and exploding. Okay, so respect for them. But, and I think this was the real kind of one of the core messages of my op-ed. If you're a concerned American and you're hoping that some unelected official somewhere or a cabal of civil servants somewhere will resist this president and fight his policies from within the government, then you will be disappointed.
You never saw any resistance or deep state?
I certainly saw people's personal reservations. I never saw a deep state. That's right. What I did see was people kind of really weighing this thing. And if I can use an analogy, working as a diplomat overseas, as a foreign service officer, feels kind of like, watching your home from a distance. And so, even under the prior administration, and I mentioned this in my op-ed, I absolutely could see visible cracks in the walls, maybe even the foundation of our nation, or our government at least. The past 3 years have felt like the house is on fire. And not only is it on fire, but there's a man purposefully lighting more fires. And so, when I talk to my colleagues, it's not that they don't feel the same distress that I do. They absolutely do. It's not like they're not as concerned as I am about that house on fire. It's not that they don't have compassion for the people in that house who are being hurt. It's that they decide to keep their distance and hope that the house is still standing afterward. And for me, that is the definition of complacency.
You, in fact, say that there's no deep state, there is a complacent state.
That's
so
right.
Explain, because look, foreign service officers are working for the American people, they're working representing America overseas, they're not representing any particular administration. There's an ambassador who's appointed, usually sometimes it's a career foreign service person, sometimes it's some donor who knows nothing but is given a lot of money. And yet, plenty of people serve overseas in administrations they don't like, they don't agree with the policies, but they faithfully execute the policies as is their job.
That's absolutely true.
So is that complacency or is that service?
So let me come back to that particular question. But what I'll say is I've thought about this for a long time, at least 2.5 years, not more than that. And what I'll say is I rationalized it to myself using the same words you used. I swore my oath to the Constitution. I serve the American people. I don't swear an oath to a particular president or a particular party. And that's true, but that's really abstract. So when you read the commission of a foreign service officer, of a diplomat like me, you'll see that it's written there explicitly. We serve during the pleasure of the president. And so what that means is the way we serve the Constitution, the way we serve the American people is by working for the president that they elected. And right now, that president is Donald J. Trump.
So did you, were there specific events or in the United States or specific policies that you just felt you could no longer essentially be the face of in a foreign land?
There's no single kind of straw that broke the camel's back. There was the slow buildup, and maybe I'll call it moral distress, kind of with each successive kind of tweet or action. It started with the Muslim ban, the executive order in January 2017, and then defending white nationalists after Charlottesville. It was family separation. It was revelations about squalid detention centers. It was it just yesterday? Federal agents kicking down doors and arresting parents on their children's first day of school. So what's different about this administration for me, and I only worked under two, but at least in my lifetime, I've seen a number of presidents. What's different is kind of the naked, unapologetic cruelty. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the sheer kind of managerial incompetence of this administration. The rollout of that Muslim ban, that executive order, was disastrous. In Vancouver, for example, we had, we have a docket of interviews.
Posting.
That was my last posting, I'm sorry, at the consulate in Vancouver. Our consular officers and kind of all the employees there had pre-scheduled interviews for many of the nationals from the countries from which travel was banned. That morning, many of them were caught mid-conversation with people when the news came in via cable. But even then, there was no forewarning. We had no idea this was coming. We might have even seen kind of the White House statement and then the cable. I'll give you another example. And this is an experience I've had personally. I'm absolutely sure many of my colleagues have had the same one. Every morning we kind of read our cable queue, this inbox of guidance straight out of State Department headquarters, drafted by, or at least cleared by, with the direction of political appointees. And, an example, a cable will contain talking points for the day, let's say on trade. And I am, tasked with memorizing those talking points, finding meetings with senior foreign officials, delivering dutifully those talking points. And it has happened to me that in a meeting with a foreign official, kind of mid-sentence, that official that I'm talking to will pick up their cell phone and point to a tweet from the president that directly contradicts what I'm saying in person. So
talking points that the administration, the State Department sends to you in the morning, sends to the embassy in the morning, and you go and do your duty and start having a meeting about it with a foreign official. The president tweets in the middle of that meeting, coincidentally, and the foreign official says, "You don't know what you're talking about."
That's exactly right. Or it used to be the case that any pronouncements, any public statements by the president or the Secretary of State, whether by Twitter, Facebook, public statements, public remarks, are policy. And that was true under President Obama. If I saw him tweet something, if I saw a statement on the White House website, I could repeat those. I didn't have to ask for permission. I knew that was my guidance. Under this president, that is not the case.
So when you're in a meeting like that and you're trying to maintain legitimacy, you're trying to maintain that you are you're speaking for the State Department, you're speaking for the United States. I got to say, if I was in a meeting with somebody and that happened, and I was that foreign leader, I'd be like, why am I even wasting my time talking to you?
That's exactly right. It's embarrassing.
We got to take a quick break. We're going to have more with Chuck Park in a moment. We're back with former Foreign Service Officer Chuck Park, who's just resigned from the State Department in a very public way with criticisms of what is going on with the State Department and this administration. Look, there's a long and proud tradition in Democratic and Republican administrations of people, Foreign Service officers and others, saying, I can no longer stand by and do this job, and I resign. It's rarer that people then write an op-ed, and it's a very public resignation in the way that yours is. Why did you want to write an op-ed and send a very strong message about why you were leaving?
So, I've been asked a bunch of times over the last 24 hours whether I'm calling people out. The short answer is yes. But I'm not calling out my former colleagues in the Foreign Service. I'm not calling out other civil servants in the federal bureaucracy. They're doing their jobs and they're working hard. I am calling out the American people. If you are concerned with what's coming out of this White House, if you're dismayed by images of, again, children in squalid detention centers, if you don't like your president using rhetoric that emboldens white nationalists, then it's up to you to resist. And you can resist by protesting, you can publish an op-ed, you can run for office, or you can vote. And so I hope to do one or more of those things now that I'm out of government.
Mm-hmm. You were in for 10 years. You were doing, you knew what the job was. You knew that you might be working for an administration that with different politics than your own. And plenty of people work for administrations with different politics, but if everybody resigned every time there was a new president, there would be chaos.
I completely agree. So, I'm not advocating that, every president should bring in an entire new bureaucracy every time there's a transition. That would be chaos.
And you would get people with no qualifications and no experience.
That's right.
I mean, as much as people in this administration deride career civil servants, calling them bureaucrats, these are people who develop an expertise in what they're doing.
Absolutely. So all I can say to respond to that question is that I couldn't do it anymore for myself. And to me, it felt like kind of this president and working for this president was an extreme, kind of frustrating, kind of outrage-inducing experience, almost on a daily basis. And I'm referring mostly to domestic policies than the foreign policies that I had to.
The president often says in the prior administration, people around the world were laughing at us. No one's laughing at us now. Is that your experience? Because in my travels overseas, I hear a lot of laughter, and it's not like laughing with us.
I'm gonna be a little cute and respond to that. So it's really, I've been in meetings where people didn't know that I was the U.S. diplomat in the room, and it's really interesting to hear what other nations say about us behind our backs when they think we're not listening. And it's not all positive. There's still a belief in America. So let me reaffirm that. And kind of just to circle back to kind of the core job of a foreign service officer, of a diplomat, is to represent America overseas, to explain it, and to defend America. I'm not sure right now that there's a coherent America to project to the world. There's an America I believe in, and I came home to fight for it.
Chuck Park, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
For the first time, President Trump is now directly tied to a controversial reversal on a major U.S. environmental decision. There's exclusive new reporting tonight by CNN's Drew Griffin detailing a conversation the president had regarding a decision that could upend more than a decade of scientific warnings involving Alaska's pristine Bristol Bay. Drew Griffin has details.
The meeting took place on the tarmac during an Air Force One stopover, June 26th. Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy, a pro-mining, pro-business, anti-EPA governor, met with Donald Trump for nearly a half hour.
Just got off of Air Force One with President Trump.
Dunleavy has been pushing for approval of a massive gold and copper mine known as the Pebble Mine, planned for Alaska's Bristol Bay watershed, home to the breeding grounds for one of the world's largest and most pristine sockeye salmon fisheries. And after his meeting aboard Air Force One, Dunleavy said this about the president.
He really believes in the opportunities here in Alaska, and he's doing everything he can to work with us on our mining concerns.
Inside EPA sources now tell CNN the very next day, June 27th, top EPA officials in Washington held an internal video conference with Seattle and told the staff the EPA was removing a special protection for Bristol Bay and, in essence, clearing the way for what could be one of the largest open-pit mines in the world. That internal announcement was a total shock to top EPA scientists, sources told CNN, because their environmental concerns were overruled by Trump political appointees. Bristol Bay and its tributaries are regarded as one of the world's most important salmon fisheries. Roughly half the world's sockeye salmon come from here. It's been protected since 2014, when after 3 years of study, the Obama-era EPA used a rare provision of the Clean Water Act to basically veto any mining that could pose a threat. EPA scientists writing a mine would result in complete loss of fish habitat that was irreversible.
It's mind-boggling that it's still being considered at all.
Christine Todd Whitman is a Republican, a former New Jersey governor, and under President George W. Bush, ran the EPA. She has joined several other former EPA chiefs to publicly oppose the mine.
The potential damage is so overwhelming. The opposition to it up there is amazing. Over 80 miles of streams, thousands of acres could be damaged from this project.
This is the second time during the Trump administration the political appointees at the EPA have decided to remove special protections for Bristol Bay to pave the way for this huge mine. In 2017, President Trump's first EPA administrator, scandal-plagued Scott Pruitt, canceled the protections after a private meeting with the mine company's CEO. After a CNN report exposed the meeting and the lack of scientific debate behind the reversal, Pruitt backed down and put the protections back in place. Now another private meeting, this time with the president himself, has led to yet another win for the mine and removal of environmental protections for this pristine watershed.
One of the most troubling things about this administration on the environmental side is this disregard of science. They're gutting science across the agencies, across the departments, across the government.
Even if scientists at the EPA are advising you, Mr. President, this is very dangerous to the environment, to the fisheries, to the state of Alaska. If the president decides, that's the decision?
That's the decision.
And the only recourse then is for environmental groups to sue?
Environmental groups, Native Alaskans, you'll have a host of lawsuits, I am convinced.
Alaska's Governor Mike Dunleavy, elected last fall, is a huge Trump supporter. He's met with President Trump multiple times, sent this letter to the president asking for a long list of EPA reversals, including what he called the Clean Water 404 veto, a direct reference to Pebble Mine. A member of his staff used to work on the Pebble project in public relations. And at EPA headquarters, Andrew Wheeler, the former coal company lobbyist who now runs the agency, has a tie to Pebble Mine, too. He has recused himself from decision-making on the project because his former law firm represents the mine.
Drew Griffin joins me now. I mean, just the, even saying a former coal company lobbyist, coal industry lobbyist, is now running it, that says a lot. We've seen so many of these decisions, favors really, that put developers or mines or drilling rigs ahead of the environment. So is this a done deal? I mean, will this mine be built?
Well, Pebble Mine must still have its permit application approved, but our EPA sources, Anderson, say this is basically a done deal. The EPA says that those Obama-era protections were just outdated. I'll tell you, Anderson, the government scientists we've been talking to don't believe that for 1 minute. They consider this mine terribly dangerous for the Bristol Bay watershed.
There's no doubt this was a decision by those Trump appointees, not scientists, correct?
Yes. Matthew Leopold, the general counsel for EPA, made this decision. At first, the EPA denied that this meeting the day after the governor's meeting took place even happened. Not true. When we confronted the EPA with our own evidence, they admitted this meeting did take place. It's in this meeting, 1 day after Trump met with Alaska's governor, that those EPA scientists were basically told the decision was made. And as one EPA official told us, Anderson, we were told to just get out of the way.
Again, a government agency, they deny a meeting took place, and then you show them what you have on it, and then they're like, oh, yeah, that happened. Right. Drew Griffin, I'm glad you're doing this job. Thank you.
Thanks.
Coming up, President Trump takes hits from the 2020 candidates after his trip to El Paso. We'll talk about that with presidential candidates Julian Castro and whether he thinks the president is honest when he says he wants to do something on background checks. Chris Cuomo is off tonight. Welcome to a special edition of 360. In the hour ahead, President Trump's confidence that he and pretty much he alone can take on the National Rifle Association, although he hasn't done that in the past, and secure legislation for stricter background checks for gun buyers. Also, his visit to El Paso and Dayton this week and his behavior throughout. We begin, though, not in either of those cities, but in Clear Lake, Iowa, because of all of this is now part of the presidential campaign. Joining us is Democratic presidential candidate, former Housing Secretary Julian Castro. Secretary Castro, appreciate you being with us. Do you take the president at his word? Well, actually, I probably shouldn't even phrase it that way. Do you believe he actually is going to try to do something on background checks? Because that's what he said after Parkland. He's saying the same thing. Do you think it's going to be different this time?
Well, look, all of us hope and will work toward that. I hope that the president is serious and that Mitch McConnell is serious. But like anybody who has watched these two and what they've done when it comes to common sense gun safety legislation in the past, I'm not holding my breath. What often happens with this president is that he says what he thinks he needs to say to calm people down in the heat of the moment when people are demanding common sense gun safety legislation, like he did after Parkland. And then a few days go by with no action, a few weeks go by with no action, and then suddenly a few months and even years go by without any action. I hope this time is different. But really, it's up to all of us as American citizens to continue putting the pressure on the president and on Republicans in the Senate to actually do something this time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good sign if for those who want some sort of change on background checks that Mitch McConnell, the president isn't telling Mitch McConnell, you got to come back now, you got to bring everybody back now, we have to get this done now. Mitch McConnell is saying, we'll look into this, once summer recess is over.
Yeah, one of the defining aspects of the American body politic today is that, I'm as guilty of this as anybody out there, but it's very short attention span. Very short attention span. So what's a hot issue right now and what people are really pushing on today could well be different in 2 weeks, 2 months, and much less even further along than that. And I think they're counting on that. I really believe that this is part of a new NRA playbook to mouth some happy words, give some encouraging signs that change might happen, cool people down in the moment, and then let the moment pass without doing anything.
Yeah, I want to play for our viewers who haven't been following this as closely some of what the president has said over the course of time and just how similar it is. Let's listen.
We're going to be very strong on background checks. We'll be doing very strong background checks. We want to be very powerful, very strong on background checks.
We certainly have to strengthen background checks. Everybody agrees with that.
We're really, I think, going to have the support of the NRA having to do with background checks, very strong background checks. I think it's time that a president stepped up, and we haven't had them, and I'm talking Democrat and Republican presidents. They have not stepped up. It's not going to be talk like it has been in the past. It's been going on too long, too many instances, and we're going to get it done.
I mean, he's not giving any specifics. Now he's saying meaningful background checks. Who knows what that means?
It is. It sounds like just talk, and that's what it's been so far. No action, just talk. And in the meantime, he has cozied up to the NRA. He's depending on the NRA to dump a lot of money to help him get reelected in 2020. You also have a Congress that is full of, especially Republicans, who believe that they need the NRA and its supporters to get reelected. And, that makes it very hard to actually get something done. But I will say, Anderson, the most striking moment to me of the last few days was the moment where the governor of Ohio went up there a day or two after the shooting in Dayton and basically got shouted down by people of different backgrounds, I'm sure Republicans and Democrats, that shouted, do something. That resonates with a lot of Americans right now, Republican and Democrat, 90% of whom support universal background checks. So I don't believe that people are just going to let it go.
I also want to ask you about reporting today by Axios that Trump campaign officials and allies of the president, some of them believe that the Democratic candidates, including yourself, calling the president a white nationalist or white supremacist, that charge could actually help him win re-election. Do you think they could be right? Could it both embolden his base and alienate mainstream Republicans?
I believe that his failure to help bring this nation together along racial and ethnic lines, and in fact, his active fostering of hate along ethnic and racial lines is one of the reasons that he's going to lose in 2020, not succeed. Because I think a lot of people, no matter what the color of their skin is, what their background is, they can see what's happening in this country. I would ask Americans, do you feel more divided or less under President Trump? Do you really believe that we can take 4 more years of this? Do you feel good about our country right now under his leadership? In these last few days, when we should have a president that is out there able to heal the country, he's completely unable to rise to the occasion time and time again.
Yeah.
So he may think that this racial priming that he's engaged in is going to help him, but I don't believe it is. I think that a strong coalition of people from different backgrounds is going to go the other direction.
Just lastly, I want to ask you about, along those lines, about alienated people, about something that your brother, the Congressman Joaquin Castro, did earlier this week, tweeting out the names of people in his district who gave the maximum donation to the president's reelection campaign, and writing, quote, their contributions are fueling a campaign of hate that labels Hispanic immigrants as invaders. I know you defended that action today. I mean, people have said, well, look, this is all public information. Reporters look into this stuff. This is all available for anybody. But for an elected official to be putting this out, a lot of the Republicans are saying, look, this is inappropriate. It's essentially in a time where people are so polarized, you know, potentially threatening putting a target on some of these people.
Well, my brother put that information out, which is publicly available information of folks that had maxed out, made the maximum contribution to the Trump campaign. A lot of them high-profile business owners in San Antonio, as he said, as a lament to say, look how ironic it is that we're in a city in San Antonio that is over 60% Hispanic. A lot of these folks have made their money, made their fortune off of the backs of the Hispanic community. A lot of their employees are Hispanic, and they are contributing money into the pocket of a campaign for Donald Trump that is then turning around and putting Facebook ads up that say that there's a Hispanic invasion to the United States and creating a climate of fear and hostility toward the Hispanic community. That's what my brother was doing, and you know, some of these right-wing publications suggested that he was doxing these people. He did not put their phone numbers or their addresses in his post. He listed their names. He said that they were max-out contributors.
Are you glad he took it down?
What President Trump wants is he wants that information to be secret. What's that?
Are you glad that he took it down? He took down the tweet.
Like, that was his decision. But I do believe that in our democratic society, we have public disclosure rules and laws so that this kind of stuff doesn't happen in the dark, so that people do know who are funding campaigns. And if it's publicly available information and he shared it without sharing any